Hey, man, it's time for the intro. Let's do the intro. You want to do the intro?
Yes, let's do it now.
Let's do the intro. Let's fuck it up the ass. I'm sorry.
I'm not gonna fuck the intro up the ass.
Got that, get that explicit tag out of the way for you iTunes listeners. So, yes.
We do not approve of anal rape.
Nope, not one bit. So welcome back. I think this is episode 8. Is that right? 8?
8, 9, 10, 6,
whatever.
Some shit like that.
Some, less than 10, but greater than 1. Of Corey and Matt talk about.
Diggy.
Yep. So, what? We're recording this, or have recorded, on, what is it, Monday evening? December 30th, 2013.
Correct.
Safe to say our last show of the year.
In all likelihood.
Yep. So, and we're going to be doing our top, no, we're not doing
This
any of
year
that
it's
shit.
the best of Corey and Matt. That's false.
Yep, that's incorrect.
We don't do that shit, man.
We might should, but we don't.
This is a real show.
So yeah. So let's see. We're going to talk a little bit about the Vidya games.
Vidya?
Yep. And
The world. Some dude set the world record for having the most video
yep,
games.
he's got a lot of stuff.
Yep.
And world record for having a lot of stuff, or people can do that. And then we're follow that up with a little talk about a cool new Macintosh console emulator that just came out of nowhere.
OpenEmu, we love it.
It's the bomb diggity, yo. Then we got some talk about the new Mac Pro,
Which is out in the wild.
Yep.
You can see it, touch it.
You can get
love
one.
it.
I mean, well, you can order one. You might not get it till like February.
Yeah,
you
but
can get
some people have theirs if they pre-ordered.
Yep. And then a little brief bit talking about they've cast Ant-Man in the next Marvel movie. Mm-hmm. It's going to be Paul Rudd.
Mr. Rudd.
Have some thoughts on that. And we'll wrap it up with a rambling conversation about the Hobbit 2, Electric Boogaloo,
Legend of Curly's Gold.
Curly's Gold. This time it's personal. Goes to hell.com /
Creep Thoughts.
All right, so y'all strap in and listen to the music, and listen for the music, but you can listen to it as well.
If you'd like.
Yeah,
Whatever.
Whatever works for you. And we'll see you in a minute.
Here we go.
We have returned
Here we are.
after our long absence. Well, it has been a couple weeks.
Oh, the public's been crying out.
Yeah, certainly. They've been, crying out. We don't know for what exactly. Perhaps in protest. We don't know.
That's my belief.
But, yes, the various things have conspired to keep us away. But we are back.
Mostly laziness conspired.
Yeah, pretty much. But like to at least maintain the facade of some sort of diligence here.
And also other work.
Yes, that's it. The livings we have to make upon ourselves.
Damn them.
Did you have a pleasant Christmas?
My Christmas was delightful and is ongoing. I'm still on my lovely holiday Christmas fun time baby Jesus break.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm enjoying it tremendously.
Although technically today was a vacation day for me.
Right,
But,
gotcha.
But it all counts in my book, so it's all contiguous.
That's right.
So let's see. Fortunately, the time we missed was also kind of a slow news time of the year anyway. So.
Exactly. It all kind of shuts down. It's not like during this time you're getting mostly the best of 2013 kind of bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. I still think we need to do a drunken holiday spectacular, but I guess maybe not this year. But
we've still got time.
it can just be a drunken spectacular
Right.
No holiday required necessarily.
I mean, drunken is spectacular just by itself.
Full stop.
Yep.
So let's see. Look at the links we've got here.
So many links.
Know where the best place to start is. I guess at the top. I don't think this is that interesting a story in and of itself, but the meta conversation is a good one, I think. So they had an AP story about the guy breaking the record for largest video game collection.
Yep.
He's got like over 10,000 games, something like that.
Yep.
And he's just a suburban dude, and he has them in his basement. And, I'm like, awesome, good for him and everything. But I'm just baffled. I'm like, why doesn't some rich asshole have this this title,
Well, I thought about that. You brought this subject up to me a couple days ago, I think.
I did, in preparation for this very conversation.
Right, and I thought about it for a while, and I realized I looked at a few other records. And the fact of the matter is that other than this scant bit of notoriety, there is no value to what this guy has done. Now, it would be valuable to me because I love video games.
Right.
It'd just be cool to be able to lay your hands on any, looks like he's got mostly cartridge-based games here, and disc-based games from what I'm seeing. But it would be awesome just to be able to lay your hands on, Bible stories for the NES or some really crazy, obscure game.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, and it's a harsh reality, folks, but rich, successful people do not spend their time doing this kind of thing.
Right.
And when you look at a lot of these records, they're exactly that type of person. Just sort of run-of-the-mill, mainstream, middle-class person who's wealthy enough to have access to resources. Like, this guy's probably not, impoverished by any means.
Oh, no.
I would imagine he's a, middle-class guy.
Upper middle class, somewhere in there.
Who has, 20, 30, 40, 50, up to $100 to blow at any given time without it causing him too much stress.
Well, I think it says he's a college professor. But
oh, there you go.
At any rate.
So, probably makes somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000, $85,000 a year.
Right.
So this is a guy who can, depending on what his other debts and circumstances are, who can go out every week probably and buy 5, 6 used video game cartridges if he wants to.
Yep. He says, let's see, a budget of $3,000 a year.
Oh, there you go.
Is what he was limiting himself to. So, yeah.
And that'll do it.
Not dropping a ton of coin on it.
Yeah, that is a huge amount of money, but if you stop and think about it, it's no more than, say, you spend on gas for your car in a year's time.
Yeah.
I'm sure, if you're an avid moviegoer, you'll drop that much money going to movies in a year's time.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's just what I saw when I was looking at this and some of the other Guinness Book World Records is just more than anything requires the will to do it. And a lot of really rich, successful people, they just aren't going to spend their time that way.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's kind of why I brought it up, because you're right. Every time I see a story like this, it's the kind of guy it is,
Yep.
Whereas, I guess it's more fun that it's not some rich guy, because let's face it, a rich guy could just plunk down the money.
Sure.
Bam,
snap his
record.
fingers and make it happen.
But, it does kind of strike me as odd in the sense that, say, a guy like, say, Steve Wozniak,
Right.
who is not really in the business of making money anymore. He's just basically enjoying himself.
Mm-hmm.
A guy like that maybe would be the type to have some interest, esoteric enough, and the money to pursue it. Or do you think maybe they just never bother?
Well, I think
like their records they probably have broken, but who gives a shit?
Right. And those of you that don't know the illustrious and attractive Corey and Matt, here's a little something about us. Corey collects comics, and I have sort of a ersatz 1980s arcade in my basement.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 2 dedicated standalone arcade machines and a MAME contraption and a ColecoVision and a Tekken. So we do a little collecting ourselves. And I think that's mainly what it is. Again, if you go back to this guy's income, he probably makes college professors, usually don't get much above the low six figures, even fairly prestigious ones.
Right.
So I think once you get into Woz kind of money or rich guy kind of money too, in other words, collecting used video game cartridges is something this guy can do consistently at his income level. But he can't collect cars.
Right.
He can't go out and buy a fleet of Segways.
Right.
So I think once you start to get a lot of, once your income gets over a certain, it has to be right in that line. You can't be poor and be a huge collector, but you can't, if you're too rich, then, maybe you want a jet.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Maybe you want a Porsche. And then I don't think $25 used video game cartridges and CDs hold much appeal for you.
Yeah.
That would be my guess, is that when your income gets to a certain level, then you start thinking about shit like, houses in Puerto Rico and stuff like that.
Horizons just get bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that must be it, because it's a broader conversation, but I've lamented before that we just don't have enough eccentric millionaires in this day and age.
Really, there are hardly any. I mean, the last great weird asshole, was probably Steve Jobs. And he wasn't particularly weird, but he was kind of weird.
Yeah.
And he was certainly.
You look at the way he lived in the Jackling house for so long, with essentially no furniture.
Yep.
Lived on a mattress on the floor.
Right, and even after that, even when the dude had a wife and kids, I forgot what he spent, 6 months, a year, picking out a washing machine.
Right.
Because, Steve wasn't going to go down and get a Whirlpool from Sears.
Right.
That wasn't going to occur. So, yeah, you're right. We really don't have that kind of Willy Wonka-esque. Who's the guy I'm thinking of? From the Scorsese movie, The Aviator.
Oh, Howard Hughes.
Yeah, there's nobody like that. Jobs was probably the closest, and Bill Gates is the richest person in not just in America but in the world. What a boring fucker.
Right.
What a boring fucker.
He's got a massive house, but you don't know anything about it, and it's just a massive house. Full stop.
And maybe he's fooling us. Maybe he has performing midgets behind closed doors and shit. Maybe he, juggles muskrats or some shit, but he seems like just a dude for whom the accumulation of wealth in and of itself was the goal.
Yeah, yeah. And, now he's turning around and giving a lot of it away. That's
right.
What he does, so.
Which is fine, but it's not very interesting.
No.
Howard Hughes risked his fortune, just to give you some comparison, at least 4 or 5 times during the course of his career. Pumped every nickel he had into some, frankly, harebrained scheme.
Yeah, and by all rights, it should have been broke forevermore after that.
Absolutely. But was not. So, you're exactly right. We don't have enough interesting weirdos anymore.
Yeah. And I don't know. Like I said, we could take up an entire podcast just talking about that, but I don't think we will.
Let's
for
not.
The enjoyment of those at home and ourselves.
America will be angry.
Yep.
We sorry, America.
Let's see. Did you want to talk about OpenEmu or EMU? I don't know what's.
Let me talk to you a minute, America. Yeah. OpenEmu is awesome.
It just fell out of the sky. It was just there. I heard no buzz about it.
Yes.
It just appeared.
If you aren't aware of OpenEmu, I don't know how they pronounce it.
Yeah.
But that's what it looks like.
I don't know if they spell it out or if they say emu, like the bird.
Tetris. If you're not familiar, if any of our listeners aren't familiar, there's a big scene on computers that have been around really for at least a decade, maybe longer than that. Ever since personal computers reached a certain power level, and I guess it was maybe the early 90s, where they could emulate or replicate other video game systems. In other words, there are programs on computers that will allow you to run what are called ROM files from the old Nintendo, Atari 2600, and Television. Virtually any old arcade games.
It's basically a copy of any old cartridge game, arcade game, whatever.
So you're sitting there in front of your computer, you run this software called an emulator, and you can play, The Legend of Zelda from the NES. The exact version of it. Anyway, this was a scene generally that was a lot more popular on Windows-based computers because there was just a ton of other options.
Well, things on Windows computers were generally more popular, full stop.
In general,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
and this was no exception. My main contraption that I mentioned earlier was running on a G4 Mac with a Mac emulator, but it had died. My G4 Mac had died about a month ago.
Yeah,
and
like that.
The emulator I was using was no longer being developed. And in point of fact, there was absolutely no Mac emulator.
Well, no arcade emulator.
Right.
There were console emulators.
No MAME emulator.
But MAME had long fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, and if you don't know, MAME is an acronym for Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator.
Yeah.
And so, and really the console emulators were mostly ancient. There wasn't a whole lot of development in that arena either.
Yeah.
There are a few for the Mac that are still in active development.
They at least ran on Intel.
Right. Right. So there wasn't a MAME emulator. Anyway, what we're getting at is these guys dropped this great application called OpenEmu, which is a multi-system emulator for OS X. And it's really terrific. I hadn't heard about it. You said you hadn't heard about it.
Nope.
It just popped up one day. And if you've never dealt with emulators at all, let me tell you, it can be a pain in the ass. You have to have a fairly high level of technical prowess sometimes to get them running and to
find ROMs.
Find ROMs, set the refresh rate on your displays, blah, 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 on and on and on and on.
Yep.
And they're not the easiest thing to set up. But this OpenEmu emulator for Mac OS X is terrific. It has basically like an iTunes or an iPhoto-like interface. All you do is drop your ROMs into the window. It processes them, finds the artwork. Well, it's not perfect. Doesn't find the artwork for everything, but finds the artwork. Figures out which system that it needs to emulate. Configures joysticks for you. It's really truly a GUI-based full Macintosh experience emulator.
Yep.
That works great. The only problem that I've seen for it so far is that you have to feed the ROMs in maybe a dozen or 2 dozen at the time. If you throw 100 at it, it's going to choke out.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. If you have several thousand like we do, yeah, that's not going to work if you try to drop them all in at once. But
that's a quibble.
They probably weren't prepared for that level of emulation.
That's really more our fault than theirs.
Exactly. What I love about it is just that it's one stop. There's no more of this having to. What's the best SNES emulator? Well, I like Nesticle, but
Yep.
that's an NES emulator. But anyway, you get into all that. Some are free, some are not. Some have better gameplay, some have better sound. Yada yada yada. It takes care of all that. It sorts it for you. The only thing it lacks is arcade stuff, and they say that's on the way.
Yeah, it doesn't do MAME emulation yet, but that's already in the pipeline.
Right, and I mean it should be as trivial to add that as it was to add the rest of them, because all they did was went to these open source emulation projects and took the engines from these various emulators and just rolled them into one program and put a really nice interface on top of it. So one presumes that's all they'd have to do with MAME is just put the engine in there and, Bob's your uncle.
Yep. The problem is that somebody's having to do work on the engine because there was no active development going on.
Right. So
So
they're
it's
having
going
to
to
catch
take
it
a
up.
while.
Yeah.
And if it uses a system called cores, which is what you were just talking about. So let's say you drop a Game Boy ROM into the main window. If you don't have the proper software for that, it'll just offer to load it up. Much like it, for example, in OS X, if you try to open a file type, it'll offer to go out and look for the correct application to open that file type.
Yeah.
If you drop a ROM in there and you don't have the correct, quote unquote, engine or core for that type of game, it'll go out and download it if it's available. So you don't have to, for example, if you're only going to play NES games, you don't even have to download the other system cores for playing other types of ROMs.
Yeah.
But why wouldn't you?
Well, that's the thing. It gives you the option to only install what you want to. But, yeah, I just check the box on everything, even though there's some crap I'm probably never going to play, like Virtual Boy or,
Right. Just for historical purposes only.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's not like it's a huge, ungainly app or anything.
Not at
so
all.
I was just like, hell, throw it all in there.
And one thing I wanted to mention about it, which I think is fairly spectacular, if you've ever attempted to do Mac gaming, which can be painful sometimes, because the gaming community doesn't really care for Macs, and Apple certainly does not much care for the gaming community.
Yeah,
so it's
an
not
afterthought at best.
At best. But so a lot of clever independent developers have always made these little widgets and gadgets and things that would facilitate Mac gaming. For example, if you go out and try to find a really good gamepad or joystick for the Mac, that's a very difficult task. There's a couple companies that make them. I mean, Logitech's always made them, and there's probably one or two others, but there's nowhere near the vast array of controllers that you could get for a PC.
Yeah. Nothing.
No, exactly. So there's this great little app called USB Overdrive, which has basically been a survival tool for Mac gaming for the better part of a decade.
Since time immemorial.
Right, where you plug in a USB controller, like a gamepad that wasn't really meant to use for a Mac, but Overdrive will allow you to map the controls to various keystrokes so you can use it. Well, I don't know if they're using USB Overdrive or something. They built their own, cocktail.
Yeah.
But when you use OpenEmu, you can go out and buy any bog standard, at least so far as I've read on the message boards, and I've tried this personally. I just went out and bought a bog standard wireless PS3 controller that just has a USB dongle. Popped it in, OpenEmu immediately recognized it, and I'm not running USB Overdrive. OpenEmu immediately recognized it with a couple of keystrokes. It auto-mapped all the keys and all the buttons, and you were good to go. And the interface is super cool. So say you want it to be the same controller playing different ROMs. Say you want it to play an NES game. You pull up the NES controller. It shows you an image of an NES controller, and gives you the option to match the NES layout on your controller in any way you want to.
Right.
And then remembers that setup indefinitely, and the next time you plug the controller in, you're ready to go.
Yep, because if you get... people don't... And this is what's funny, because a lot of times you just have to futz with it and play it to see what feels right.
Yes.
Because it's all about the muscle memory if you've played these games before. So if you move A to B and vice versa and go to play, it's going to fuck your shit up.
You're going to be hosed.
If you were used to doing it back in the day.
You got no damn chance.
So it's one of those things you don't notice until you try it. But controls are super important, and they've done it just a really good job of that.
Well, these little young boys, Corey, don't know about a fast twitch game.
These youngsters.
These young boys don't know about a fast twitch game. If you're trying to play Mega Man 1 or virtually any game from that era, the control layout is crucial. There's no possible way you can succeed. If you plug a controller where the buttons are, in really even slightly off, you're not going to have any chance to succeed. Even today, I was trying to play Mega Man 2 on the Wii U gamepad, which does a pretty good job. I mean, it's got a standard sort of NES cross-key controller, and then it's got buttons. But, the two buttons, I was using the horizontal button layout. There's 4 buttons aligned in a diamond shape, and then for NES games that it emulates, it uses the 2 horizontal buttons for the A and the B.
Yeah.
Which is, about as good as you can get, but
they're too far apart.
they're a little bit far apart, and every now and then I would fuck up a jump in Mega Man and plummet to my death because, that extra, 4 millimeters made all the difference.
Right. Yep. Well, it's one of the, because there's some games you had to play with like basically your thumb across both buttons.
Correct.
So that you could hit either one at any second. There's some, you invented different configurations of your hand, like, okay, I'm going to hold my index finger and my ring finger on, and, okay, so I'm pointing the controller at the floor.
Pin down the A with my left butt cheek.
Right. I mean, that was hardcore, like I remember on Super Nintendo, the Mortal Kombat, the test your might, where you had to hit the button. So I figured out, if I held my fingernails in a certain way and just raked it back and forth across the buttons really fast, that would do it.
That's similar to the pencil.
The pencil trick. Yeah.
Very similar to the pencil trick.
Yep. Where you use the arcade or you use the pencil. Was it 2 pencils or just?
It's just 1 pencil, basically as a lever.
Yeah.
And you wedge something up under it so that, the downward and upward action were much faster than it would be if you tried to move your fingers.
Put a finger on either side and just rocked it back and forth. Yep.
So, yeah, that's who. I'm not sure who those guys are. Do you know who developed that?
I do not.
Well, it's in the show notes.
I've got the page open, but.
And if you just go to, just do a Google search for OpenEmu, you'll find it. I can't recommend it highly enough, especially if you're a poor, suffering bastard trying to be a gamer on the Mac platform. You should go and get it immediately.
Or if you just like the old school stuff,
Yep.
But yes, it's awesome. You should go look into that forthwith.
They really leapfrog a lot of guys. I mean, there's enough. Because as I told you, my G4 died, so I was gonna, reluctantly install Windows 7 on my Mac Mini and do my emulation through Windows.
Yeah.
Before this came up, and there's nothing this easy to use on the Windows side. Now there's a huge, vast universe of choices.
Not to mention having to deal with Windows itself.
Right. There's a massive number of choices, but they're all complicated as shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is really just the best emulator out there, period, for either platform, and we're just lucky it happens to be for OS X.
It's not even... they did so much right. I mean, it just... It was like a nuclear bomb to the Macintosh emulation ecosystem,
It was really unforeseen.
Yeah.
And, we've hyped this so much, people are going to go out and use it and go, I was trying to play Superman Nintendo 64 ROM, and yes, it's going to crash. It's an emulator. You're trying to do something basically hinky from the get-go,
right?
Which is play a ROM on a computer, which was never meant to play it. But in my experience, the gameplay has been really quite stable. The only problem I've run into is, like I said, if you try to force feed it a gazillion ROMs.
Right. Well, too, and the newer the system, the more of that kind of thing you're going to see.
Correct.
Basically, around the level where you start to run into trouble is, truly next gen. Anything beyond 16-bit, basically,
right,
is where you started getting in trouble.
You're good to go with everything up to a Super Nintendo for sure, and probably Nintendo 64 and GameCube stuff will work okay. But people maybe don't understand that console gaming, the software is written to optimize for that exact system.
Right.
So you've got to still have a pretty powerful general computing device, a PC. You've got to have a pretty powerful computer to fluidly run even something like, say, Super Mario World from a Super NES.
Yeah, or even an original Xbox game.
Exactly.
Like that. Yeah.
It's got to be pretty juiced out because these Yeah, like I said, the software was optimized for the particular system, and they were getting every iota of power out of that system that they could.
Well, yeah. I mean, and it's really a smaller version of the advantages Apple realizes from its hardware. In that Apple, Apple knows exactly how a Macintosh is made.
Yes.
What's in every one that ships, so they can configure the operating system to play expressly to that hardware configuration.
Yeah, and there's a very limited number of configurations.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and with the console, there was one
Yeah.
motherfucking configuration. Right. So, yeah, that's a good way to think of it.
Yeah. So, at any rate, y'all should go check that out. It is the bomb diggity, yo. What,
for reals.
What's, oh, hang on. I closed the list of, items.
Mac Pro too expensive is the next thing.
Yes.
We probably should talk about the Mac Pro.
Yeah. That's certainly the biggest, if not only, bit of Mac news there is to talk about, really.
Yeah, it's and they finally started to trickle out.
So it shipped. Well, it started shipping on what, the 19th?
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, the two articles I have linked are closely related. But of course, the first question is, and really, we've always had to deal with this about
perpetual
Macs in general. But it's like Friday poll on CNET was is the Mac Pro too expensive? And if you look in the comments, and of course there's the camps of like Macs are always more expensive, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had that camp broken out, but most of the conversations I saw broke out to they spent time arguing about how expandable it was. So yeah, they were fighting about how expandable the new Mac Pro is, which
sure.
Is like a perpetual thing with Macs,
constant.
But up until this point, Mac Pro users have at least had that option.
Sure.
If they had a tower, they could expand it if they wanted to. But, whichever side you fall on, this is just how Apple is going to be. You saw them moving this way in consumer electronics. Up to this point, I don't think there was any real reason to think that's not the way they go with the Pro end of it either. And they, the Pro line they've already demonstrated isn't, that's just not one of their focuses, right?
They've made no secret about it.
Right.
I mean, Apple has not released a computer that you can expand within the container. I do want to draw that distinction out a little bit more, but Apple has not made a computer, a mainstream computer for the masses that you could expand within the original housing, really, since the Mac 2. The original Macintosh was not.
Right.
Nothing since in the new Steve Jobs era has been.
It was always a thing Steve specifically fought against.
That's right. And like I said, under Scully, they released a few of those big-ass horizontally aligned, I think it was the Mac 2 or the Mac 2C, where it looked sort of like a Performa Pizza Box Mac, but was huge.
Right.
And you opened it up, and there were slots and blah, blah, blah. It was pretty similar to what you might have seen, the sort of casing you'd see in an old, 486 PC.
Yeah.
That sort of big horizontal slab. But when you think about that, they haven't done that really since probably the late 80s. There's been no mainstream Mac. The only...
Well, yeah, no mainstream. It's always been Pro stuff.
Right. Well, I mean, arguably, like the Apple II was a very expandable computer, and that was meant for a home user.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I don't know about the Mac 2. I don't know where that follows. In that era, you could argue that none of the Macs were really ever meant for a home user, frankly.
Right. And the Apple II kind of became that incidentally.
Yeah, it wasn't really intended for that,
Right.
but became that. So, yes, this is not something Apple's done. And so with the Mac Pro, if you've watched where they've gone with the iMac and you've watched where they've gone with the Mac Mini, the idea that they were going to release a big tower that you could swap shit in and out of, that was a pipe dream. There was just no reason to think that that was going to occur. Now, that being said, I do want to make the point that when people talk about expandability, what they've meant historically is, in other words, all computers are expandable through ports.
Right.
And what the argument has been is that we want PCI expandability, or now PCIe, because of the speed and the throughput.
Right.
Well, and in the past, that's valid, especially for people, folks doing professional high-level computing, because you can't hook up a hard drive to a USB 3 port and do some of the things that you need to do.
Yeah.
It's just not fast enough. But the Mac Pro has, 4 Thunderbolt ports?
I think
6?
it's got like 6.
6 Thunderbolt ports. Thunderbolt provides
Thunderbolt 2, I think.
Precisely.
As a matter of fact.
Thunderbolt provides throughput as nearly as fast as anything a PCI card would provide you. So the argument in the past has been we need to make a big box with a lot of PCI card slots in it because we want to do this, that, or the other. And even with FireWire in the past, you could make an argument that you still needed that card slot.
Well, yeah. It's just nothing was going to be faster than putting it straight on the board,
right?
Basically.
But now with Thunderbolt, that's really not a valid argument anymore,
right.
Because the speed, the entropy in your system is going to come from the speed of the end device. It's not going to come from Thunderbolt.
Right.
Thunderbolt is super duper fast. And if you want to have hard drives, if you want to have optical drives, if you want to have anything chained onto a Mac Pro, it's going to provide you. That's not going to be the slowdown in your system anymore.
Right.
So when we should draw the distinction that when people are complaining it's not expandable, you're specifically now talking about people who want to jam things into an enclosure.
Right.
Exactly.
They want to open it and futz with it.
So, and I'm not sure that's a particularly valid use case anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, it ultimately doesn't matter now if it's valid or not because
you're not getting it.
This is what Apple has done.
Right.
You can take it or leave it, and Apple has repeatedly demonstrated that they are willing to do that to their users. Sometimes it's more or less fun than others,
Well, and also that is where it's going. But as Mac Pro reviews have started to trickle in, we're beginning to see that the system is more expandable than people previously thought.
Right.
For example, you can take the case off of it very easily. You can swap out the graphics cards very easily.
Yep, the processor.
The processor's removable, so it's not as bolted up as an iMac is, for example.
Right. Yeah, an iMac, shit. Talk about welding the hood shut.
Yeah, you're done.
Yeah.
You can add RAM, period.
I think the true power user would have an iMac as his display.
Yeah, exactly.
Using the target display mode. That 27-inch iMac.
That's right. You just buy it for nothing but the display.
That's how you do that. Yep. And and eventually they'll have the 4K iMac, and then so
then you will truly be cooking with all 8 cylinders.
King under the mountain. The next related link to that was about a PC site trying to build a PC with the specs of a Mac Pro.
Mm-hmm. How'd they do with that?
They failed to do it, failed to do it at that price.
Correct.
And I think failed to do it. Period, because there are some things that weren't available in the configuration you can get in a Mac Pro. I forget exactly where they stumbled, but you can't quite get the exact same graphics cards, you can't quite get the exact same RAM configuration, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, I'm sure that'll catch up, but at any rate, it's not like Apple. Well, right now, Apple is a better value, and even when PC catches up, this won't be one of those situations where you're paying the huge quote-unquote Apple tax.
Well, and again, if you've watched Apple's history, this is not an uncommon thing at all. When Apple releases a new configuration for a existing system, and certainly when they release an entirely new system, it typically has 6 months to a year where it is absolutely, positively, demonstrably not more expensive than its PC counterpart when you configure it spec for spec.
And in a lot of ways, it's the only game in town for about that 6 month period. Yep.
Right. And right now, the Mac, you cannot, and I'm calling you out, nerds, you cannot go out and build a PC with the same configuration as a Mac Pro for what Apple is selling one for. And that's even, by the way, as a quick aside, by the by, because I see this a lot in these type of articles, that's factoring $0 in for your time, labor, and effort. Because, you know, a little monkey ain't coming to stick this PC together for you. Even if you buy all these components, it is a non-trivial task to build them into a system.
Right.
It takes quite a few hours to, you know, get the components, put them together, test everything, you know, ROM, all the shit you've got to install the operating system. This is a fairly significant amount of labor. But even if you leave all that out, even if you count your labor as zero, even if you consider yourself to be a worthless human and you literally have nothing better to do in the world, and so your dollar, your effective,
your loaded rate,
hourly wage is $0 an hour, you still can't put together a machine with the same specs that will match a Mac Pro.
If we pay you what Apple's paying the robots in Austin to put these together,
exactly,
you still can't beat it.
And that's often true. Now, 6 months from now, you might be able to. A year from now, yes, they might be more expensive. But when Apple releases something new, generally speaking, if you want to get those same specs, they're not only as cheap as a comparable PC, they're often a few $100s cheaper. In the case of the Mac Pro, some of the numbers I've seen is they may be thousands of dollars cheaper.
Yeah, it just depends. Another argument, which of course, you know, it's subjective, so you're always going to get pushback on it, is something equaling the quality of an Apple product.
Correct.
You know, can you count on the box you put together in your basement holding together, you know, as well as a Mac Pro?
You can't buy any Apple Care for that, Jack.
No, exactly.
There is no 3-year warranty on the shit you put together in your basement.
Right. You have a warranty on the individual parts, maybe, you know, if you're lucky. But at any rate, you know, it's a badass computer, any way you slice it.
Yes. And if you need that much computer, now a much more interesting argument to me, and one that you don't see as much, because, of course, nerds always want to believe they need the fastest computer they can possibly have. A more interesting argument is who possibly needs this powerful of a computer? And the correct answer is almost no one.
Yeah.
As a percentage of the population, far, far less than 0.1% of all the professionals in the United States probably have any need for computing power this vast.
It's hard to imagine a computing task for which this isn't massive overkill.
Right. Somebody like the only... There's this whole concept of pro user or power user out there, and I only know of one, and this is not a personal friend, but, you know, just
a guy
anybody,
you can name off the top of your head.
and that's Alex Lindsay. Alex Lindsay and a guy like Alex Lindsay who...
From Pixel Core.
From Pixel Core, who, with a Mac Pro, with the right type of technology, if he can shave, 10 minutes off of every video project he's doing, then he's making money pretty quickly by having that Mac Pro.
Yeah.
You think of almost anybody else and you probably don't need that kind of power in a computer.
Yeah, and I don't even, like I said, I I can't think of anything it's not massive overkill for. You know, like it is, if you want to build a render farm out of them, you know,
Right.
that would be a good use. But
even probably 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, you would say a high-end graphic artist who uses Photoshop a lot. But even nowadays, even that is a hard argument to make, that a high-end iMac wouldn't suit every conceivable need of somebody using Photoshop extremely intensely.
right, well, yeah, and that's the thing, because you know you get into that situation where the performance increase just becomes so incremental.
Right.
You know, that just, no matter how much hardware you want to throw at it, Photoshop ain't ever going to be but so fast is
Correct.
the problem. And that's just how it is with most software, is it just, you know, that it's already saturated.
The software becomes the bottleneck.
Right. So, you know, it's like your wireless network at home. You know, it's for the longest time, wireless has been faster than Time Warner.
Correct.
You know, so it did not really matter how fast your wireless network was, because it was always faster than what you were getting through the main pipe in the wall.
And that still's the case.
Yeah,
to this day.
And so, you know, it's the same situation. Like, Photoshop is as fast as it can get, no matter what else you throw at it.
Right. So what we're getting to is that, you know, the Mac Pro, there's a very small use case where buying a Mac Pro makes practical sense.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any damn difference. If I had $10,000 laying around, would I go buy one? Shit, yes.
Hell yeah.
But be realistic about why you're doing it.
Right.
You're buying a Mac Pro to be a badass, not that you need a Mac Pro.
Right. And so yeah, what we're trying to say is we're looking forward to you know, our next home theater PC set up here when we strike it rich.
Boom.
Because that's going to happen. That's how that's going to go.
It will occur.
That's the joke Leo Laporte keeps making anyway. And he has the money to do it.
Oh, Leo's not even sort of joking. He started out just fucking with Andy.
Yeah.
You know, because Andy thinks it's... Andy has sort of a... He sympathizes with the proletariat a lot on Mac Break, and Leo does not. Nope. Leo's like, oh, yeah, I could feed 1,000 starving children, or I could buy this damn Mac Pro for my PC, theater PC. And I have no doubt that Leo will do just that.
Right. Well, he's going to have one.
Right.
Regardless.
And you know, he in the job that those guys have, you can always blow it off. You can always say, "Oh, well, I needed it to do a review," or blah 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 blah. I couldn't speak about it authoritatively unless I purchased one. Like, bullshit.
Whatever, motherfucker. So I think that wraps up the PC portion of our discussion this week. PC, Macintosh, hardware-ish type stuff.
Yep. Got a little bit of time left. We ought to tear through a few entertainment items.
Yep. So let's see. Since we last spoke to you, Paul Rudd has been outed as Ant-Man in the ongoing Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Rumored, and then the rumor's like, no, the rumor dried up for a while, and turned out the rumor was correct.
Yep. So yeah, I don't really feel either way about it. I'm fine with it.
It seems okay.
Yeah.
The coolest thing to me they could have done with Ant-Man is really make him this sort of complex, angry, abusive Hank Pym that we saw in the Ultimates.
Yeah.
They're clearly not going to do that with Paul Rudd.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think. I mean, maybe they'll surprise me.
Well, there's some question of whether it's going to be Hank Pym. Period.
Oh, right.
Because they're I think Marvel's on their third Ant-Man at the moment. Some people think it might actually be the latest Marvel Ant-Man because he's the more comedic Ant-Man. I forget the character's name, but at any rate, between that and the guy who's directing it, they think, maybe Marvel's going in a more comedic direction with this. Or it might be Hank Pym done in that style. Who the hell knows? An amalgam Ant-Man with a little bit of all of it.
And you hope it doesn't end up costing Marvel. This is a risky move for them because this is something very unlike they've done with any of their movies so far.
Right. Well, yeah, it's one of those, there's no real fan demand for an Ant-Man flick. It's not a naturally cool-sounding concept. They're just basically banking on their name. And they're like, well, if we can make a movie that's good enough in and of itself, we can add this to the stable, and that's another franchise we've essentially created from whole cloth.
Well, right, and all that, yes, but actually where I was kind of going with it was it's also going to be a very, very different sort of movie than they've ever made. It's not just an obscure character. There's no way that this, with Edgar Wright directing and now Paul Rudd starring, there's no way this is going to be a straight dramatic superhero movie like every one of their other superhero.
Right.
This is going to be this. If it's not an outright superhero parody, it's going to have to be comedic, and you just hope that this is not their. This is not Marvel's Arnold Schwarzenegger twins moment.
Right.
Or their Pluto Nash moment,
right?
Because this is a risky venture.
Well, yeah, and that makes me, it makes me wonder how closely related it's going to be to the main Marvel universe. Like, how securely is it going to be hitched to their wagon? Because if it doesn't do well, they want to be able to just cut it loose. And just pretend it never happened, basically. So I don't think we're going to see tight Avengers integration or anything like that unless it does well, and then they'll pull it in retroactively,
Yeah, man. Well, we have no idea at this point what they're going to do. I mean, it's being released under the Marvel, logo. So, yeah, it's going to be really, another movie I just looked up, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. That's the other sort of thing. I wake up in a cold sweat.
God.
Oh God, no!
The hell you say?
Stallone's trying to act. Shit.
Oh God, why?
But I do fear them going too far outside their wheelhouse. But hopefully it'll work out okay. Edgar Wright's a good director.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Paul Rudd's a charming and funny man. So
and Feige seems to know what he's doing. So
yeah, thus far,
I'm looking forward to it. I kind of get excited when Marvel does this kind of off the wall stuff, because it's like shit you never thought you'd see,
Yeah, that, and now that we're mentioning it in this same vein, Guardians of the Galaxy, which is going to be a major release, is also
we're
going to be a bizarre detour for Marvel.
Yeah, we talked about that during the Thor conversation. It's just a really weird choice. I think it's got objectively more going for it than say an Ant-Man flick, but
sure,
even so, it's still pretty weird. And as we saw from Pacific Rim, even a huge amount of spectacle in and of itself is not necessarily enough to drive people to the theaters.
No, it won't. I mean, they're going to be trying to sell a team movie, first of all, which isn't the easiest thing, and a team movie with no recognizable names.
Yeah.
It's not like X-Men. Everybody knows who Wolverine is. Even when the first X-Men movie came out, of course, he's an international huge brand now, but even before the first movie came out, Wolverine was a known quantity.
Yeah.
And the X-Men were a known quantity. You knew Cyclops, you knew Beast, you knew...
They'd had a cartoon. Yeah.
This is not the... folks, if you don't know, we might have mentioned this in the other podcast, but one of the Guardians team members of Guardians of the Galaxy is a talking raccoon.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is a giant-ass tree
Yeah,
that only says one
a
word.
living plant that just says his own name. Yep.
Yeah, that's the only word he utters.
Groot,
So
voiced by Vin Diesel.
this is not a simple task they've set for themselves.
Only one human amongst them.
Yep.
But yeah, no, like basically you pick any character out of this movie you want to and go to a guy on the street and be like, have you heard of blah? And the answer is going to be no. No, I have not.
I know Groot. I went to high school with a Philip Groot.
Yeah,
I mean, other than that,
this is a Moondragon ain't even in it, is she?
Rocket Raccoon. That was a serial. I think you show it came on after Thundar the Barbarian,
man,
didn't it?
That was, yeah. That was, well, no, wait, that was Bucky O'Hare I'm thinking of.
Rocket Raccoon. He was Bugs Bunny's gay cousin, wasn't he? I think. Is that right? The same one you're talking about?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Shit. But yeah, all that to say that, yeah, Paul Rudd, great, fine. I don't think that detracts from the movie in any way. It'll put some asses in the seats that people have heard of him. Hopefully,
Yeah, people know who Paul Rudd is at least.
yeah. So yeah, we'll see what we get. Let's see.
Probably have time for about one more, you think?
Yep. Well, we could wrap it up with a discussion about the Hobbit.
Yeah, let's do that.
We've both seen the latest Hobbit flick, and I think we can finish out the hour with that just because.
And what was the Hobbit called?
The Desolation of Smaug.
I don't think that's correct.
Smaug.
What was it again? It was,
The Desolation of Smaug.
no, that's wrong.
Smaug.
I think yes, sure, maybe in New Line's promotional materials. But we all know what the original
Smaug.
We all know what the original name of the Hobbit was going to be, right? You put it here in the show notes.
I did.
Corey.
Oh, Hobbit 2: The Legend of Curly's
That's
Gold.
right, Hobbit 2. Hobbit 2: The Legend of Curly's Gold. Those cowards at New Line.
I know, right?
Why didn't they go with Peter Jackson's original vision?
I think Electric Boogaloo
Hobbit 2.
was the other choice.
Back to the streets.
I didn't know you were referring to my joke there.
Yes. I thought it was too amusing not to share with America.
How many times are you going to let me attempt to say Smaug?
That also was amusing. Yeah. Smaug.
Smaug. Smaug. I don't know. Shit, man.
That dragon is what we're trying to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Goddamn dragon.
Motherfucker. Breathing fire and shit.
Shit.
Man.
Trying to eat a damn little fat hobbit. I hate that son of a bitch.
At any rate, yeah, I think we can wrap up the hour with this just because we don't have a whole hell of a lot to say about it.
No.
It just reinforces, I think, the opinion we had about the first Hobbit movie, which is there ain't enough Hobbit to make 3 movies out.
Well, yeah, it's unchanged. Our opinion really since even before the first movie came out. When we were discussing it, those many years ago, in the dark days before there was a Mighty Beacon, a podcast for America.
Exactly.
When we just discussed things because we wanted to.
Wasn't even a twinkle in our eye.
Nope. And but when we first heard of it, like, oh, they're going to go back and do
our collective eye.
It's one big nasty bulging eye comprised of all 4 of our eyeballs,
but not all cool and fiery like Sauron.
Just nasty and bleedy and gross. But yeah, we talked about it then. We said, okay, first. Prequels are kind of ass right from the get-go. They're
pre-spoiled for you.
Yeah, your emotional investment is always diminished because you know where the story is ultimately going to end up. Secondly, we heard that they were going to make 2, and we thought, that's interesting because The Hobbit is one book, not nearly as long as Lord of the Rings. They made 3 movies out of the Lord of the Rings, and they're going to make 2 out of The Hobbit? That's weird.
That much that happens in The Hobbit.
The Hobbit's a pretty straightforward story.
Yep.
There's not a lot of... Hey, in fact, we can go over the story events. The dwarves arrive at Bilbo's house in Hobbiton. They meet Elrond in Rivendell. They meet Bjorn. They make it to Lake Town, and then the Battle of the Five Armies occur.
Yep.
That's basically The Hobbit.
And the don't want to spoil it for anybody, but the dragon is dispatched with almost incidentally, really.
Man, the dragon Smaug.
It ain't got much to do with Thorin.
Yeah, Smaug plays really a rather small role in the book.
He's basically the MacGuffin. All the shit happens around him.
Correct. He's the reason the story unfolds.
Right.
That's exactly what he is. He's the MacGuffin. So we both said when we heard it was going to be 2 movies, that's weird. That's a lot.
It's a stretch, but
maybe. And then from the man that brought us the 3-hour King Kong, be damned if it wasn't announced that we're going to make 3 movies out of The Hobbit. And I don't care what any of you nerds say on the message boards. I've been at it with you. You're just stupid. There's not enough material in The Hobbit, and I told you this, and it's come to pass. I said there's not enough material. They're going to have to make up tons of shit wholesale.
They're dragging in shit from the Silmarillion, and even that is not enough.
Right.
Because, and that's what is more obvious with this movie. They're making up even more shit, just wholesale. Just inventing sequences and characters and just storylines.
Yeah, to the point where this has become The Hobbit only in a very general, tangential way.
Right.
Because what you're seeing on the screen now is, I would estimate, by the time we get through the 3rd movie, I would estimate less than 50% of it will have the material that actually come from the book, The Hobbit.
Right. And yeah, like, you can no prize some of it away by, like I said, the material they pulled in from the Silmarillion. But even then, just the sheer amount of crap they're inventing. And it's not terrible crap. I'm not watching it go, oh, this is heresy,
No. And I don't mean to imply that either. It's reasonably entertaining.
Yeah.
But it's not The Hobbit.
No, it's not The Hobbit, and it's just, again, it's all anticlimactic after having seen Lord of the Rings.
Correct. Well, again, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but yeah, actually, I don't give a shit. This is we'll put a spoiler note, at the beginning or something.
Well, goddamn, how long have the books been out?
Exactly. And, well, I'm talking about specifically in the movies now.
Okay,
but also, that's what we do. That's what we talk about. So if you come into this worried about getting plot points of a movie revealed, it's not what you want to listen to until you've seen the movie.
Go shop somewhere else.
I think that goes without saying, that if you tune into a podcast that say they're going to talk about The Hobbit, you will need to have seen it if you don't want it to be spoiled.
It's been out for like a month.
Yeah.
Get off your ass and go see it.
And that being said, so let's just to give concrete examples of what we're talking about. First of all, there is no ass-kicking elf in The Hobbit at all.
Right.
Period.
Of any name.
Period, right. Much less 2 of them. Much less is one of them Legolas from Lord of the Rings.
Nope.
Now, that entire sequence...
Legolas' daddy ain't in it?
Nope. That entire sequence is just made up wholesale. Pulled directly out of Peter Jackson's, no doubt, stinky, hairy little New Zealander butthole. He just literally invented that. Now, that being said, you can invent as many characters as you want. The lovely and talented Miss
Evangeline
Lilly from Lost as you want to.
Yep.
I do not have a problem with that.
All the elves could look like her.
Every
far
one
as I'm
of them.
concerned.
Just clone it. Have her portray every elf, and that would be fine with me.
Then I could watch it with my pants off.
And then also the elves of the bikini realm would need to be invented. They are all elves of the thong realm, Thorin.
Well, why not at this point?
Exactly. You're pulling everything else into it. But so there are no elves, kick-ass elves, period. There are a couple of bad guy elves. Those exist in The Hobbit. There are no kick-ass elves. There's no hot female elf. There's no Legolas. So this is the sort of thing we're talking about.
Yep. Well,
Oh, there's no... Oh, shit, I almost forgot. Sauron is in no way and in no incarnation involved in the story of The Hobbit.
not in it at all. Nope.
Not even marginally.
No, it's no. So the whole bit that whole subplot again, and this is just the problem with the prequel. There's no way they can make that compelling. You can't put Gandalf in any sort of danger that makes us worry for him, and you can't make it look like anybody's going to stop Sauron.
Yes,
because they're not.
They're not going to until the goddamn Fellowship of the Ring.
Right.
And not only can you not make us worry about Gandalf, and they spend a lot of time trying to make us worry about Gandalf.
Yep.
First of all, we know his old ass lives. Second of all, we've already seen him die and be resurrected.
Right.
So, I mean, you cut his head off, it's not going to matter.
Right.
So, right, all that stuff. And
it's also a little irritating seeing him using more magic in The Hobbit than he ever used in The Lord of the Rings.
Right. Yeah, it certainly is.
More obvious magic.
Much more powerful. He's doing a lot of more Gandalf the Grey mojo than he did in the pretty much
trilogy.
The entirety of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And one other.
It was always very subtle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the baddest ass thing he basically did in Lord of the Rings was when he stood down the Balrog.
Yeah.
And just along those same lines, in The Hobbit, God, there's so many things that I can't keep them fucking straight in my head of all the shit that they've invented. And I was gonna say, we talked about Smaug only playing a small role in The Hobbit. In point of fact, Gandalf only plays a very tiny role in The Hobbit. He's basically there to get Bilbo into the
He kicks
troop.
it off. Yeah.
Yes, and then he shows up to dispatch the a couple of other points, with the goblins and a couple of other times, but he's a bit player at best.
Yep. He's essentially gone.
Yes.
For most of it. Yep. Yeah, it's I think I enjoyed it, as much as I think I could. But the other problem with padding it, even all the shit they put in there, to make it as long as 3 movies, you stop and think about it, not that much happened in part 2.
No.
Because they didn't even get finished with Smaug in part 2.
Nope, they didn't even. And I thought for sure.
I thought that would, be the end of that one.
Me too.
At least, and they'd clear the decks for the Battle of the Five Armies.
I thought that the part 2 would certainly end with the death of Smaug, but no.
So yeah, and Smaug, they dragged out his encounter with the dwarves. I don't know, a good hour.
Holy shit!
The back third of the movie.
If you've ever read The Hobbit and then you see what they've concocted in this movie version of The Hobbit, it really is almost an entirely different story.
Yeah, it's. Don't get me wrong, because probably what I enjoyed the most is the sparring between, Bilbo and Smaug, / Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch.
Right.
When the dwarves actually show up, it's it kind of goes to hell.
Yeah, it
it's
becomes
just not entertaining anymore.
No, it becomes a giant Disney ride at that point.
Yeah,
the whole back half of the Smaug encounter was cartoonish.
Yeah, there's shit bouncing off each other, and more gold than exists in the entire universe.
And how do they? Yeah, just you wonder, for the guy as smart as Peter Jackson, who was almost devoutly concerned with the themes and the
just authenticity
right, of Lord of the Rings. He's just butt-fucked The Hobbit.
Right.
He's just done whatever he wanted to do with the story. They have the dwarves have a full-on battle, essentially.
Right.
With Smaug inside the mountain, which is insane. It's just stupid on the face of it. You can't fight a dragon almost anywhere, certainly not in an enclosed space.
Right.
Because the dragon would stand in the middle of the goddamn hall, spin around, shooting fire in every direction, and that would be the end of the battle.
Just be fire top to bottom.
You're much too small to escape from him. I mean, in other words, once you are revealed to him, that is the end of the fight.
Right.
Because you can't run away from him fast enough. He would have killed them one at a time. And how do they end up, Corey? How do they end up finally fighting him off in The Hobbit?
They melt an enormous gold statue onto him.
Yes, they build a massive gold statue spontaneously. Something that you would have thought it would have taken the entirety of the dwarf population.
Well, I tell you what I interpreted from that. It looked like that was something that was in process originally when they got driven out of the mountain.
Right.
And they just never got to finish it. So
Right.
the mold was sitting there ready to be filled. So they fired up the forges
Yeah,
and filled
still.
up the mold. But yeah.
But yeah, that's how I interpret it too. But still, like, how many are there in the company? 12, right?
Right.
And 13 including Bilbo.
Well, yeah, not all of them showed up.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
This is like 10, I think.
they got the forges going, got all the gold loaded up, poured it into the mold, broke the mold open at the exact moment when Smaug was in the exact right place.
Standing in front of it.
Yeah,
Mesmerized by its goldenness.
it's fairly ludicrous.
Which, I mean, yeah. I mean, I think what nobody wants to cop to is, you know, in much the same way that The Hobbit was aimed at a younger reader than Lord of the Rings, the movies are aimed at a younger viewer.
Right.
But you won't get them to actually say that. All the marketing and everybody making it and the people talking about it are putting it right up there with Lord of the Rings, and
Which
it's
is
not.
preposterous.
Right.
Yes. First of all, Peter Jackson chose to restrain a lot of his Frighteners' sensibilities
Right.
with most of Lord of the Rings. Now, it finally got out of control a little bit in Return of the King. It was a reserved Peter Jackson we saw for most of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And he hasn't been that guy since King Kong, and he hasn't been that guy during the entire filming of The Hobbit.
Right.
It's just been balls out the whole time with, you know, shit flying around, platforms dropping, impossible. The whole movie essentially is the raft scene from Temple of Doom.
Right. There's just so much stuff. It's dense, and there's just so much shit going on. It would be different if it was stuff that had any other purpose other than we need stuff because we need this to be 3 hours.
Yes. Well, it's not. People may disagree with me, and that's fine. That's their right, but they're incorrect. But these Hobbit movies are very much like the Transformer movies. Now, the Transformer movies, I think, take a lot more shit because people hate Michael Bay for some reason. They just despise, you know, I don't know if he's been douchebaggish to people or whatever. People don't hate Peter Jackson like they hate Michael Bay, but it's very much the same filmmaking sensibility, and that is it needs to be kinetic and shit has to be moving and happening for the sake of shit moving and happening.
Right. Right. Just keep shit moving around to hold people's attention. You know, well, we could probably do a whole podcast on the differences, but probably one of the biggest ones, Michael Bay did not establish he didn't make good in the beginning like Peter Jackson did.
Right.
Peter Jackson made three really good movies.
Yep.
And now people are pretty much willing to let him do what the hell ever because he's got those 3 movies. Well, kind of like George Lucas.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like nothing has been as good as American Graffiti and Star Wars.
No. Or, you know, arguably THX 1138.
Right. And you know, Lord of the Rings, I don't know if anything Peter Jackson ever does is going to be as good as Lord of the Rings.
Well,
but he's going to get a goodwill get goodwill because of that.
And it's certainly not going to be good as if he never attempts to make anything as good.
Right.
See, that's the other problem.
Yeah.
I have been disappointed in Peter Jackson since the stampeding brontosaurus scene from King Kong. That's where it went off the rails. I'm like, he's not trying to make a serious movie anymore. He's locked into his weird thing that he wants to pursue, kind of like Robert Zemeckis for years was locked into his desperate manic pursuit of photorealistic CGI characters. Yep. That's all. And if you guys don't know what we're talking about, Robert Zemeckis, the director of Forrest Gump and Back to the Future trilogy and a lot of really good movies, for a long time, starting with the Polar Express, did basically nothing but made movies that allowed him to explore his desire to make a photorealistic CGI human character.
Yep.
You could see the movies he chose. He chose them for no reason other than that, and didn't have any particular desire in the movie other than to express that. And Peter Jackson's been doing basically the same thing since the Brontosaurus Stampede in King Kong, which is just pursuing this crazy, frenetic CGI roller coaster ride. To what end, I don't know, but that's all he seemed to be interested in doing.
Yeah, it's really strange. I don't know what desire he's playing to, what need it fulfills for him.
Yeah, I don't either. I just know that he has not directed a sequence as powerful and as moving as, say, the death of Boromir in Fellowship of the Ring since that time.
No,
even the second two Lord of the Rings movies were spectacular and had great moments, but even they became gradually more frenetic.
Oh yeah,
as time went on.
Yeah, the single tightest and the best quality movie, yes, was Fellowship.
Absolutely, it was. Absolutely, it was.
I thought the second two were as much, if not more, entertaining.
Yes.
But quality-wise, yeah, I think you got to give it to the first one.
Yeah, Fellowship of the Ring is the best movie he ever made. And I think a lot of that is because he chose to restrain a lot of those impulses.
Right.
And for whatever reason, now he has chosen not to ever restrain any of them.
And the studio is enabling him.
Right.
By being like, hey, Peter, how about 3 movies?
Right.
3 hours each, no less. Not 3 2-hour movies, 3 3-hour movies.
Yeah, it's a good 6 hours. It's a good 7 hours more. Let's see, what are we talking about? 3, 6, 9. So yes, it's a good 7 hours more movie than you really needed to make.
Yeah, yeah. They could have gotten away with 2 hours.
You could have easily made one really strong 2.5-hour Hobbit movie.
Mm-hmm. I think it would have been far better.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there's just so much padding. I mean, just scenes so much longer than they need to be.
It makes me, we've talked about this briefly before, but originally Peter Jackson wasn't going to direct these movies. He was just going to produce. Yep. And he was going to have Guillermo del Toro direct. And again, I think there was a real missed opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
I was really looking forward to that.
To be fair, Del Toro, his flaws are similar to Jackson's in that regard.
Yeah, he has his own things that he can't resist doing, certainly.
But at least you were going to see something really visually arresting and original.
Right, and it would have been very different from the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Right, absolutely it would.
From a stylistic point of view, which is, I think, what they needed.
I do too.
And that's where my interest is going to come from, because when I heard they were going to make The Hobbit, I was like, oh, well, that's cool. It'll be nice. But, I already saw Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit just ain't going to be but so good. But then it's like, oh, Del Toro is going to direct it. It's like, oh, okay, well, cool. I'd like to see what he does with it. But they basically dickered around so long that finally he was like, I can't just sit here not making these movies for 10 years.
Right. They basically insisted on, you're exactly right. They essentially wanted a 10-year commitment from the man.
They kept him tied up.
And, and I don't blame him. I would have walked too, because, I would love to speak to Del Toro at some point. Maybe he'll be a guest on the podcast.
Maybe.
I would love to speak
Y'all help us with that.
If y'all
know
know
somebody,
Guillermo,
yeah.
give him a damn call. I mean, he seems like he would be fun to hang out with. But at any rate, I wonder if he didn't think at some point, there's not enough material here for what they want to do, and I'm going to cut bait while I can.
Right. And, well, that was probably the smart call. I enjoyed The Hobbit. They weren't terrible movies, and I love revisiting the universe,
Yeah, and it kind of comes off now that I think about what we've said, like we're trying to bash it.
We sound like old fogies.
But that being said, I'd give them the first movie a 6 and the second movie a 7.
Yeah.
I enjoyed them, but they're just so much diminished when you put them beside the original, Lord of the Rings trilogy that it's hard to like them.
We're critical because we love.
Exactly. I mean, your expectations, are so high. It's the same sort of thing that happened with Chris Nolan with The Dark Knight Rises.
Mm-hmm.
After The Dark Knight, people just had impossible expectations.
Right.
The Dark Knight Rises is one of the 3 or 4 best superhero movies of all time, in all likelihood.
Impossible.
But, and yet true. But yeah, it gets an undue amount of criticism because it's not as good as The Dark Knight.
Well, yeah.
And The Dark Knight, of course, is, period, the greatest superhero movie of all time.
I was about to say, yeah. That's, well, this movie's not as good as Citizen Kane, so fuck it.
I'm not going to waste my time watching this shit. It's not nearly as entertaining as Psycho.
Yeah, exactly. There's another entire podcast we could spend talking about the Batman movies.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so we sound like crusty old fogies.
We don't mean to be.
But we did like the movies. It's just
we're not saying we don't like them.
Yeah, they could have been better, so much better, and
by being less.
Yeah, exactly. And and you just can't forget that you've seen Lord of the Rings is the other problem.
Mm-hmm.
There's just nothing you can do about that.
They've got a nasty, inflamed, pus-filled case of sequelitis,
right,
or prequelitis.
To make the case, for the opposite direction. Your son saw them both and loved them to death.
Adores them.
So. That just proves that we're
as he adored the Star Wars prequels, as most kids adored the Star Wars prequels. So there you go.
But yes, that said, and so yeah, we'll be back in a year to talk to you about The Hobbit 3.
This time it's personal.
Exactly. Son of the Hobbit.
Hobbit 3, Hobbit's Vengeance.
And we've bent your ear for like an hour and 20 minutes now. So our little bit about the Hobbit turned into a half-hour conversation. But
we can run our mouths.
Yep. At any rate, we'll let y'all get on with your lives for this week.
Eat your dinner and make love to your beautiful wife.
Once again, I am Corey.
My name's Matthew.
And we'll talk at you later.
Later.